like the environmental impact statement they just issued for the wind farm complex they want to build out here that said it had no significant environmental impact. Construction will have no significant environmental impact.
It's impossible.
It's impossible.
You're building a giant electrical system in the middle of the ocean.
Yeah. Fish don't cross those cables.
No.
We could be carbon neutral, but we could destroy marine environments. What's better?
I mean, that to me is a cannibalistic way of thinking about our future.
It's a polarized conversation at this point. It's so much demonization. And
I think it's a hard pill for a lot of environmentalists to swallow, that perhaps their own movement has been co-opted. I'm Nicole Shanahan. Welcome to Back to the People podcast, which highlights the growth of a movement uniting America, where our government is free from corporate capture and where we give voice back to the American public.
I went to the rally here in November and met Bobby. He asked, well, what do you do? I was a fisherman. And he threw out a name of someone that I knew that worked with him in Portland with water keepers. And that kind of sold me. It's like, okay, this is someone that actually has been here, been around the industry, has helped commercial fishermen across the country in various different ways. But I also think that from some of your other positions, I think you can understand where we are in the regulatory mess we are now and understand the corruption side of it. Because, I think that there's definitely corruption in the National Marine Fisheries Service. I think, and I don't know from where, but to reach these decisions like they have, like the environmental impact statement they just issued for the wind farm complex they want to build out here that said it had no significant environmental impact. Construction will have no significant environmental impact.
It's impossible.
It's impossible.
You're building a giant electrical system in the middle of the ocean.
Yeah.
Or in the middle
Lobsters don't
of
cross those cables. Fish don't cross those cables.
No, and they're emitting they're emitting heat. They're emitting energy. They're also, posing massive risk if there's an error or a misfunction or a leak from any of these cable and battery systems.
Or that they just disturb the environment enough that fish don't want to go to places.
Yeah.
I can talk from a perspective of that with, the herring fishery. I'm involved in the herring fishery. I go crew on the FV Sunlight out of Rockland. And those guys all used to go down off of Block Island, right out front of Point Judith, Rhode Island, and they'd spend the winter down there. And they'd work on herring all winter. Well, after 2016 was right about when the Block Island wind farm went up. And ever since the wind farm showed up, they've gone down 2017, 2018, they had a few fish, but the fish haven't come back.
They haven't come back to the area where the project was?
Nope. The only thing that lives where the Block Island wind farm is now is skates. Skates and rays, that's it.
What I'm realizing is that the understanding you have of these species that inhabit these waterways is far greater than any of the scientists that I've actually spoken with that are informing the regulations, in the sense that you guys understand their patterns, their habits, their personalities, what they're afraid of, what they like to eat, how often they like to eat, how seasons impact their movements.
we also just witnessed a lot of things that happen naturally, like cycles, and we live our lives based on that type of thing. And that's something we talk about, and it's kind of common sense if you live your life in the middle of that. But somebody else looks at it and thinks everything operates just in a straight line, that because something is not here now, well, we'll never be there. And we're like, well, they actually do something different, like a lot of different years. So you come and tow, in a spot one year and don't find them and you're a fisherman, you got to move. You can't expect to see the same thing in the same place time after time. So it's a lot of localized knowledge that gets sort of marginalized and thrown out because we're doing a randomized, computer-generated assessment of an area. Same thing happens in the lobster industry with the ventless trap survey. We put down traps with no vents in them to see how many juvenile lobsters are there, but it's done with a random placement. In certain years, lobsters are very specific where they are, so you're just not getting a true look at what the stock's doing when you do that type of thing.
It sounds like the way that they're collecting data right now is they're random sampling. It's not every day. And when you're trying to submit evidence, it sometimes competes with the evidence that they're submitting, but your evidence is based on being out here pretty much every day.
I don't think I'm really different than I'm 52 years old and done it for 34 years, and I'm just kind of average, but I've got over 35,000 hours on the ocean.
35,000?
Yep.
That's incredible.
It's not, though. It's just normal for somebody who does that.
Well, and your story is interesting. So you're first generation doing this work. You were telling me earlier you were in college, not far from here, and were inspired to take a job on a fishing boat during college. What made you fall in love with this work?
I like the people to begin with. It was just, just honest, good, hardworking people. And I liked being outside, that type of thing. So it was a pretty good mix, to start with with people you like outside. We're in Maine. I mean, pretty hard to beat.
Yeah, no
All
kidding.
the surroundings. And,
It's gorgeous.
at that age, it was something you drew a reward for what you did. So the effort you put in, you could count on getting something out of it.
Was your major marine biology?
No, I was an English major.
You're an English major.
And now I put
Yeah.
fish on a stick, so I don't know if it should. It's the way we bait lobsters.
Yeah. I mean, that's an incredible story that you went from being an English major to being a full-time waterman. And so you've seen probably a lot of change in your lifetime, your 30 years
Yeah.
working out here. If you could talk about those 30 years, what were kind of the biggest changes you've experienced?
I mean, there's no doubt that the climate has been changing and the behavior of our species has changed. So when I started, we had a much bigger dragging fleet, and I'm not suggesting that everything about the dragging fleet is based on climate. There are a lot of different reasons and regulation that went into that. But from the lobster side, we've had to expand our range, basically because the behavior has changed of our target species. That being said, when I talked to my next door neighbor on the island, died at 102 and started fishing when he was 9. And so when he talked about all the different things he saw within his life, it's never been the same. It's constantly changing. And you do see cycles that come back and repeat themselves, So that's basically what I've witnessed, I think, is different cycles which have come and gone. But I think I see some of the same things starting again. We're starting to see lobsters in places that we haven't for 20 years again now. So there's that is sort of the natural change. But then really recently, the biggest change is from the lobster side. And I think the ground fishermen faced this before we did, is of sort of a distrust in what we had to say.
Yeah.
Which wasn't there.
Yeah.
In the past.
Yeah.
In the past, for a while, I sold lobsters. I ran a co-op, and we sold lobsters internationally. And we had every sustainability, marker that you could get in the industry. And they'd send people here from, different countries to see how you do it. Then all of a sudden, in a short period of time, when the whales changed their behavior, we were no longer responsible or ethical or good stewards. And nothing changed about us. We've been doing it this way for 100 years.
Do you think fishermen are being used as a scapegoat for other efforts that might be incentivized or biased to make these claims?
Can I take this one?
Yeah.
I can give you an example of what's going on right now. So when they started building these wind farms down off of Virginia and New Jersey, down through there, they have to come through and they have to do this seismic air gun surveying.
Seismic air gun survey?
They put 9,000 PSI through an 1/8 of an inch hole, blast the ocean bed, and the sonar retrieve. They essentially, it's just a giant sonar except it's done with air. It's one of the loudest things you can do. 9,000 PSI that's a lot of air through an 1/8 of an inch hole. It makes whales deaf. And other marine mammals, all kinds of marine mammals become deaf because of this. They started washing up on the shores as soon as the survey boat showed up down there. And then it became, well, it could have been ship strikes, or it could have been entanglements that we didn't know about and the rope fell off. Instead of investigating the massive industrial operation that's going on, they want to pin it on us and they want to pin it on the shipping industry. Well, whales don't just get hit out of nowhere all the time. Maybe they get hit because they're deaf.
Mm-hmm.
But if you even try to breach that subject, you get shut down.
Yeah.
You know, they don't want to hear it because there's a lot of pressure right now from the Biden administration to get the wind farms done and get this over with so that they can have their 2030 carbon neutral goal. But it's like, okay, so we could be carbon neutral, but we could destroy marine environments. What's better?
And this is where I believe having this conversation in the classroom could be helpful. Why are these environmental lawyers and regulators not having these conversations and understanding that when you disturb these ecological systems, you actually harm an entire carbon cycle under the water? This is the missing piece of the science that they seem to be disregarding in their carbon neutral calculation, because when these sea life die off, that's carbon in the water. And if these species can't grow or repopulate or have successful mating seasons because they're deaf, right? We're actually not accounting for the carbon that would otherwise be in the water, held, sequestered in living, breathing life, living carbon. So I really appreciate you sharing that with me, and I hope everyone gets a chance to understand the impact on sea life that some of these offshore wind farms have. And, even the testing seems to be harming the wildlife.
And they, like here, they sold us this, well, we're going to put 12 turbines. They called it the Maine Research Array.
Mm-hmm.
They were going to put 12 turbines out here just to east of Doggett.
Yeah, I guess.
And they were going to put them there, and they said, well, we're going to test these 12 turbines to see if there's any effect. Well, they started that in like 2017, 2018, somewhere in there. And then now all of a sudden, yesterday, they just had all the public comment for the final Gulf of Maine lease. And it's like, whoa, we haven't even tried it yet here. And you're already trying to shove it down our throats and say, well, we're doing it. It's going to be sold. I mean,
Not to mention so much of the feedback happened during the COVID era and it all had to be done online, and you're dealing with fishermen who, frankly, living online is not what they do. So they're used to being face-to-face conversation, that type of thing. And just so you didn't hear from such a large percentage of experience. And frankly, the oldest people, the most experienced, were the least likely to be able to
attend these online hearings.
Yeah, but that didn't matter. It was just check the box.
It strikes me as largely either incompetent regulation that's happening without proper representation of experienced professionals. It's interesting. When we were driving here, I drove by a Running Tide, which is actually a group that I've sponsored in the past. I've bought voluntary carbon credits from them, and I was under the impression, and I had never seen it, but I had read about it and I had read the reports. These are these large kelp beds that are being sent offshore here. And that was the kind of project that I was inspired by, because it was part of the ecology. It was working with the natural carbon cycle. I've never supported a wind farm, certainly not an offshore wind farm, because there's a degree of common sense that just doesn't pass that first common sense sniff test. Why would you put a wind farm offshore where there's massive weather events that could potentially damage pieces of it and thus pollute the water? These wind farms are made from plastics. They're treated with chemicals. They're finished with electrical pieces that, and when you put electricity next to water, I mean, we know that there's a risk there. We just saw one turbine get struck by lightning and half of it melted and it went back and shut off the whole grid. So, it didn't pass my common sense sniff test. Why do you think it's getting past the regulator's common sense sniff test?
a lot of money to be made. A lot of federal money up for grabs. And the thing is, it gets me is that it's all oil companies at the end of the day who are getting this. It's their subdivision that's Diamond Wind Energy is going to put up the research array.
Yeah.
That's Mitsubishi.
No way.
For example. So it's not being done by these clean energy startups. You're essentially transferring this big money to pay for, they'll give them as much as they want pretty much to do it to large polluters. Really, at the end of the day, it's what they do, So the whole thing doesn't, like you said, doesn't pass the common sense sniff test, and it never has, because it's so expensive. You could do the same thing
incredibly
right here on
expensive.
this dock for a tenth of the money.
And you could back a truck up to it.
Yeah. Every time it's a boat ride.
Oh my goodness.
If you think about it, if the light bulb's out, it's a boat ride. And getting alongside them in weather, I wouldn't want to do it.
To your point on the common sense, I'd like to see one example where we go into the wilderness and industrialize it, that it doesn't affect the wild. That just, of course it does. Anytime you take mankind and push something farther up on nature, it has an effect. It always has. And if you're balancing, what the value of that is, and we can do, the reason why we don't do it on the shore is because real estate interests don't want their view, to be besmirched. You look at it at that point, but you get farther off from the ocean, and the people that are there to push back against you are us, and you look at it from a regulatory standpoint and a sustainability standpoint, who would you rather be regulating, Samsung Heavy Industries or us, if you're trying to gather money out of that action, so we're a traditional industry that's done things on a small scale on purpose for a long time.
Yeah.
And we live sort of nomadically, like you tell us we have to be gone and we're gone. There's just a couple nautical buoys, it's all our gear is gone. There's no evidence of us whatsoever. So if there's a whale closure and that sort of thing, we can be gone. You can't move this stuff. Once it's industrialized, it's industrialized.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And looking at the statistics, it seems like a lot of watermen have just thrown up their hands and quit. Statistically, since 2021, half of the trade in this area alone has disappeared. Is that your experience? Is that what you're seeing?
But I watch guys get out of it every day. We can't find crews anymore. And there's a lot of factors that go into that, and I'd love to get into that later.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, I can't find anybody to go with me. I go with myself a lot now, which is not safe. But what do? You've got this $100,000 boat sitting there, and it has to make money or else it starts rotting. You know what I mean? So It's definitely getting smaller all the time. And part of it is when all this regulation happened, there's a younger generation that didn't really join the ranks. That, and a lot of it, Portland, it probably happened too, but it's more pronounced smaller towns. You can really see the age difference. And you can see where that one generation moved away and didn't join into the family business or didn't stay home, and
Devyn, you're in your early 20s, right?
Yep, 23.
So you're a young man who's decided to not only take this on as a career, but you're a real voice and an advocate for this profession.
Yeah, I do as much as I can, but it's hard to stay going at it. It's hard to be my age and say, I see enough of future to stay. I watch in my town, all the houses around me get bought up and turned into vacation rentals, and all my friends move away. I think there's 55 of us in my high school class. It was the biggest high school class to come through in years, and there's 3 or 4 of us that are still in town, and I'm the only one that's fishing. So, and there used to be, like in Boothbay alone, we had 100 lobster boats and 30 draggers. Well, I have the only dragger, and there's, I think, 70 active license holders, but in the harbor itself, there's 30 boats. It's getting smaller all the time, that's for sure. And once this next generation ages out, it's going to be really small.
And also the culture, right? Let's just talk about our culture right now, and a lack of understanding of where our food comes from. Real food, is not lab grown. and we know that some of these lab grown projects are actually big polluters. And we know that some of these, fake fish and fake meat products are full of preservatives that can make us sick if we eat too much of it. Real food is kind of under attack in general. Do you guys think that culturally being a fisherman is just really hard right now because of the fact that there's this huge marketing campaign to lead people into eating these artificially produced meats?
To a degree, but the nice thing, being us and having the product we have is it's good. And
It's
natural,
delicious. I had
so
lobster yesterday twice.
yeah,
It was
yeah. I
so
mean,
good.
it's not a hard sell.
Yeah.
So I mean, as much as echoing the same things that I've seen, I'm optimistic about the future of it because I have 5 kids and 2 boys who both have lobster licenses. One of my girls has a student license too. And my son's the same age as you and bought his first boat 2 years ago. He had a smaller boat before that, but his first full-time boat. And I just told him, whatever you do, be passionate about it.
Yeah.
Do it 100%. And I mean, there's a lot of reasons people come to Maine and here, but I mean, this whole culture is a big part of that because it's a throwback,
Yeah.
to a different time. So, nice thing about us is I don't feel apologetic about any of it. We deliver a really good natural product, and we do it with integrity.
I'll say this is the real food you can get. This is the last real naturally harvested food on a large scale.
Yeah.
I mean, we in the groundfish business struggle with market because we're so small here now, like Portland Fish Exchange right next door, they don't have the landings to hold buyers anymore. And that is really been our business's biggest economic struggle, is keeping the price up to where we can afford to go. Because we have lost out our market because we're so small, and we are gaining now with this kind of real food, naturally harvested, local. Organic.
Yeah.
We're gaining progress with that. But then when the feds come along and say, well, we're cutting your haddock quota, the fall of 2022, we had a great year catching haddock. We had a good price, finally. We built the market up here. After over 5 years, we could make money. We didn't have any money into the quota for them. And then they cut the quota and the price went to hell because we couldn't supply it. We couldn't guarantee the supply like we had for the past few years.
And when you can't guarantee the supply, it kind of sends a chilling effect to the market, right? Because there's an insecurity about whether or not your buyers are going to be able to deliver and whether or not the restaurants are going to be able to rely on it. So they look for alternatives. And those alternatives are what? Farmed?
Well,
or are they imported?
Foreign imports.
Mm-hmm.
Like what we deal with, particularly in the groundfish business, is FAS haddock from Iceland and Norway.
Yeah.
Because they can send these restaurants a 10-pound box where the fillets are all the same size, they're all cut the same, and it's cheaper. And we can't beat their price, even after they have a 150-foot factory trawler go out there and catch it, freeze it for 3 weeks, unload it, put it on an airplane and fly it to Maine. We can't beat it. Or container ship, either or. We can't beat it. That's sad to me. That's really the crux of it. It's like whenever something, it's like, when you put your foot in a bucket of water, if you take your foot out, the bucket drops, but you got to fill the bucket up somehow. So that's kind of where we are. Our foot's out of the water and they're working to fill the bucket,
How many of these advocates and environmental lawyers sat with you guys and listened and heard some of the things you're telling me?
They have over the last 30 years, and it doesn't seem to change that much. I guess a big part of it, I think you can see this too, is that the bureaucratic size of, particularly the National Marine Fisheries Service or the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, is really too big for us as small independent operators.
Yeah.
And I will guarantee that if you dug through how many people work in the Gloucester office and National Marine Fisheries Services, probably almost as many people go fishing in Maine that they regulate. I mean, it's so big compared to what we do and the effect that we can have on the environment with how small the fleet is now, you know?
Do you think that some of these folks who are well-meaning, if they spent the time to understand the carbon footprint of importing fish from Norway at the rate that we do and the subsidies that seem to be supporting this kind of exchange, do you think that if they had all of this information, that there are organizations, these nonprofits, also well-meaning, that would take this on as being one of the projects to, support these environmental efforts underway?
One thing about the whole nonprofit side of it is I do agree most people get into that well-meaning and
Yeah.
and caring about the environment and the natural resource, but it's become so much money running through all those organizations, and I'm sorry, it's easier to raise money when there's a problem all the time. It's not really easy to raise money. We said, these guys are doing a great job. I don't think we really need to, we should lean on them more. We probably need to put a little less money into the enforcement and everything on that side and the research, because they're already doing so much of this. But it's unfortunate in all of our political system, money just plays so much of a role of the way decisions are made and what the plan is going forward.
And the nonprofits have to be, they have to be paid for somehow. And I think a lot of times they end up getting bought out. Their donors, they have to be conscious of their donors so they keep their job.
The big claim is that our oceans are being overfished, and there are corporate operations, and it strikes me that these, super-sized corporate fisheries have been actually successfully regulated. And you guys represent those very different than that. And so the fact that you feel overly regulated, I think, is a really important thing, because you are doing small artisanal batches serving your local community. And you're keeping an eye on the stocks, because if you overfish, how does that impact your business?
No one in this business wants to do that, and even the big boats don't want to do it because it's not worth it to them to not be able to go back. We don't want to kill needlessly. There's no reason to.
You look at it from the lobster side, we have a 100-year history of being sustainable, and it's a lot of it is because of the way we fish. And I never felt overregulated, in the past, because most of our regulations we made ourselves.
Yeah.
Because we have zone councils where we come up and bring our own laws. But more recently, there's just sort of seems to be this trend of just more and more federal involvement and need of oversight of every activity that we're doing, and I understand to a certain point, but I don't understand entirely, because it just goes back to what I said earlier. There's, if you've worked with somebody for a long time, then you know who they are. Mm-hmm. And there should be a certain amount of credibility, but that just seems to have been forgotten.
When you come down here and you get to know who's out here day after day after day, it will absolutely influence your professional perspective. And so I've got to believe that the regulators who have done that work change. Have you seen anyone change or shift an opinion by coming down here and actually getting to know the people? And
one-on-one, they're great.
Mm-hmm.
But when they get together, that's the problem,
Sort of the culture.
Yeah, the culture is the problem. There's definitely a culture of you're wrong, I'm right. And that has to change before we get anywhere. And I have hope, like some people I met there coming up through when I was at MREP at the conference there, that I definitely say, okay, this person, we have a chance here.
Yeah.
But the problem is, unless the culture changes, they're just going to end up being the same way.
What do you think about the culture? And I'm happy to opine as well. When they leave here, they get it. They understand what's going on here. They understand this is a family business. This is not a giant corporation. That your entire livelihood depends on keeping track of these stocks, and that what you're seeing is empirically very strong evidence as to how to achieve that goal. So they leave here, you feel good about it. You're like, these guys get it. Then they go back into some boardroom surrounded by these other professionals, regulators, nonprofits. What do you think's happening in those rooms?
I don't think there's a lot of optimism in those rooms about what the resource is. Naturally there's this sort of predisposed feeling that something is wrong and it needs to be changed, which maybe is just human by nature, at that level. But every conversation starts with what we need to do to change it. And from the lobster perspective, and I think a lot of the ground fishing side, we're saying, listen, it isn't all about changing everything all the time. It's about maneuvering where we are in the moment and where the resource is in the moment. And that's the collaboration and understanding what it actually is. But that doesn't have, you look at this with modeling what's going to happen with right whale populations and what we're supposed to do in order to sustain their population going forward. And we try to do practical things. We've been doing that for 25 years, at this point, long before any of this was in the news or it was mandated upon us, at this point. But then when worrying about that particular species became more prevalent, then the whole culture is just looking for problem everywhere, so really legislating all the way from, tens of miles offshore, all the way to the beach, like right here. I have to put markers on my traps if I throw them off the end of the wharf here with breakaways. At this point, it's like, I've been in this, I can tell you where the whales are. They're not where my child is fishing and they're punting outboard in 10 feet of water. But there's this sort of feeling that you need to do everything on this mass scale. The ocean is split into grids. It's all sort of legislated equally. I mean, I think we're moving from that at this point because a lot of money has been put towards doing more research. And actually, the congressional delegation of Maine held up the omnibus bill based on saying you have to actually put some more thought into this before we move ahead with all these measures, because they're just not common sense. But it really took that to get somebody to say, okay, we'll do that.
That's really optimistic. So going back to Chesapeake Bay Foundation, because I don't want to color them as like, a problem, but I one of the projects that I saw them do that I was really happy to see, and I was like, this is a really good project, is their oyster repopulation project. So it seems like these organizations, which are really trying to manage it all, right? They feel this great pressure to prevent climate change, and they're trying to do it from all angles. And some of them, they seem to get really right. And other efforts, they seem to just be kind of adding to this, what sounds like crippling regulatory pressure on real lives like your own and real livelihoods. So, separating it out, I almost feel like having, this checks and balances. We were talking about checks and balances earlier, like a forum for comment, like this project is great. You've got this right, positive affirmation.
Yeah.
But these are the things that are really hurting us and hurting marine life. And so rather than pitting people against each other in these absolutes, it seems like there's this great opportunity that we can take that says this is a good symbiotic relationship between watermen, fresh live seafood, like the oyster repopulation projects and the reclaiming of the shells from the restaurants, the drying them out. I mean, that was, to me, really lovely. I don't know your opinion on that.
I don't know about it, but it sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, they're putting 15 million oysters into the bay each year. And I learned that one oyster can filter up to 50 gallons of water a day.
And that's in any area where human interaction has killed off the stock that was there to begin with.
Exactly. So that seems like a really great project. I mean, Chesapeake Bay Foundation, I think, got this one very right. But I think when I'm standing in the classroom and they're trying to raise these young minds to go after, these very complex topics like fishing, they need to come out here. People come to Maine from all over the world for this experience because it's a treasured experience, coming and having a Maine lobster roll. If that's gone because of, these killing off of the marine life in the name of these wind farm projects, that's a tragedy. I mean, that to me is a cannibalistic way of thinking about our future. Let's try to hit these net zero goals through these marginal, incredibly expensive projects that are feeding into corporations, because the corporations are pocketing this money, right?
It's a monstrous commercial real estate boom ahead, basically. I mean, it's an untapped amount if you basically decide that, millions of acres are now commercially viable property that can be auctioned off. There's a great deal of enthusiasm for the opportunity
Yeah.
on that level, but that's right where we've been hitting on. I mean, yes, there's an opportunity to make money off of leasing, but what are you losing? And people aren't that interested because they're so enthusiastic about this opportunity and glossing over, the sort of jagged edges of what do we actually find when we get into all the details of what this is going to do. And because it's going to make green energy, then of course all the ramifications must be positive. And I really do feel like we see that with groups that are immediately suspicious of other ocean activity that doesn't, wear the sort of mantle that green energy does now. But I tell people it's just big oil wearing Birkenstocks now, and so it makes people, feel like it must be okay the way it's been packaged and marketed. But it's no different than offshore oil drilling or any of those things, which we would never allow to happen without a lot of work going into it. And it's just getting glossed over for agenda at this point.
That's horrible. That's horrible to think that that's the reality of some of these projects. And I think it's a hard pill for a lot of environmentalists to swallow, that perhaps their own movement has been co-opted. It's a hard pill to swallow.
I mean, we want things to believe in, and it's frustrating when you want to see change happen, and it's hard to get there.
Yeah.
But it's just, and it seems like there's a lot of opportunity, in the next 20 years for change to happen the way energy is generated. And some of it may involve the ocean. There's physicists with, I can't remember if it was fission or fusion, but which is happening at this point.
Yeah. Nuclear energy is incredibly sophisticated and growing more sophisticated by the day with new developments in reactors.
I still believe 20 years from now, we're going to be talking about, how do we maintain our wind farm, which we have 20 miles off the coast here, which keeps getting blown apart every time it blows 110 miles an hour is offshore.
It's so misguided.
Everything that goes into that. And what are we going to do to clean it up at that point?
Well, in 20 years from now, let's hope the conversation isn't, look what they did to our natural ecosystems. Now there are no more healthy lobsters that can be consumed. Let's hope that's not the conversation.
Over in Ireland, they put them up. They didn't make money at it, and they left them.
They left them.
Just left them. That's the thing, is that
they flew over that wind farm.
Yeah.
Massive.
And they just,
Yeah.
And there's also in the regulatory structure, there's no, if you cause harm, this is what's going to happen to you, or you have to clean it up, or you're going to be penalized. There's no talk of that. There's no penalties at all. I mean, what industry you ever heard of where the government's going to sell them the land to do it and just say, it's yours, and I don't know, it's depressing, really. It's like these are our fishing grounds in 400 years of history. And this is how it's going to end,
It's a polarized conversation at this point. It's so much demonization. And I don't like to be the person who's pointing fingers at regulators saying, you guys don't know anything. I don't necessarily feel that way, but I do feel
How do you feel?
I feel like there's so much pressure on that side to constantly affect change.
Yeah.
because that's the culture and the climate, and sort of the time we're living in at this point. And you know, at the same point, to make that change measurable for people who need to have it be measurable to have their lives continue in office or however they're affected. I mean, so the people running these organizations need to be able to go back, you know, with accountability that we are making things happen at this point, but they're skipping steps.
You said the word demonization. I mean, the pointing of fingers at family-owned businesses that are running these operations. Do you feel like you're being demonized?
That's a generalization. There are a lot of people that don't treat you that way, but
Yeah.
there's a certain group of people who are given a lot of airtime and credibility that hasn't been earned.
Yeah.
You know, that are spending a lot of time doing that now.
I think there's also a lot of, like, I kind of feel like I've been put in the back file cabinet. And it's like, oh, that's just like, you know, when they came to Vinyl Haven and they did that article, New York Times and Boston Globe, that lobster trap.
That was
They went out and they lived with lobster fishermen's families, did this whole big thing. And then the article pretty much just all they said was, well, it's all going to be over anyways because of climate change and it's going away. And it's like, I don't see it going away. I see more life out here in the past 2 years than I've seen in the last 10. So I don't think it's going away. Unless they stop us on this side of things, there's always going to be fish. We can always go catch them. We know how. But yeah, it just, not necessarily demonized, but just put on the back burner as we'll just let this kind of fade away, you know?
And the message seems like it's being twisted, and we don't really know who is twisting it or why they're twisting it. I mean, if they're twisting it because they're trying to double down on things like the offshore wind farms, that to me is manipulation of the population for corporate interest.
which is pretty prevalent these days.
It's the American way.
Oh man, yeah, I'm glad we can laugh about it because it is really sad when you really think about it.
Now I mean, this is a great life, and I'm happy most of the time. And
Yeah, and your kids are coming out and doing
if I
it.
didn't believe in it, I wouldn't. You know, I would say please do something else, but it's a privilege.
I hope that there can be the kind of constructive conversation that can understand the difference between messages that are being produced by corporate lobbyists and messages that are being produced by family-run businesses. Because I think that when we think about the soul of America and the soul of what makes this country a place that everyone from all over the world wants to come to, it's making sure we are accurate in our representations. Because when we're accurate in our representations, we can preserve all the best that we've been able to enjoy. And so I really am grateful to you for taking the time after you loaded your lobster boat to sit down with me and us here. And always reach out if there's anything that feels like you want an extra set of eyes on and voice for. Would love to be a partner and an ally. You know, I don't want to come eat lab-grown lobster when I come to Maine. I want the real thing, right? It's just not the same. You guys see what it takes to make one of these.
Just good old-fashioned hard work, and I think we're lucky to be doing it.